Principles of economics trend, and that, take a look at principle number 2. The cost of something is what you give up to get between the Snickers bar that you valued $1. Begin to understand why choices are bad. The worst possible situation, in fact, is being offered a choice between a Snickers bar and an identical Snickers bar. Now, people who are not trained in economics might think that that's no different than just being offered one Snickers bar, but that kind of sloppy thinking will never get you a tenure-track position. Simplifying. Choices are bad. Choices are really bad. I'm not going to beat around the bush with you people. If you don't understand why choices are bad, you're probably stupid. Moving on. Principle number 3, rational people think at the margin. Translation, people are stupid. Now, it is immediately obvious that people do not think at the margin. Nobody goes to the grocery store and says, I'm going to buy an orange. I'm going to buy another orange. I'm going to buy another orange. People don't think like that. But if people don't think at the margin, and if, as Mankiw says, rational people do think at the margin, we are led to a most unhappy conclusion.
All right, welcome to another edition of Nanoeconomics. This time we're talking about marginal thinking, and specifically we're going to ask the question of whether or not it's worth it to study for another hour. So the first thing we want to kind of talk about really is how marginal thinking is really critical to understanding economics. And it really ties into kind of Mankiw's 10 principles of economics, and the idea that rational people think at the margin, and make choices at the margin. And Yoram Boeman has an interesting little kind of YouTube stand-up bit about kind of how hilarious the 10 principles are when you kind of easily, quickly translate them to, layman understanding. But the idea that we kind of generally think at the margin is loosely reliable. It's true that as Bowman said, nobody goes to the grocery store and says, I'm going to buy an orange, I'm going to buy another orange, I'm going to buy another orange, because we would pick up a bag of oranges if a bag of oranges is of value to us, and we wouldn't if we don't. We're going to quickly take in a lot of signals to make that decision. We're going to kind of read our our feelings and our stomach and our current budget and our situation, and we're going to take a look at the prices, and maybe we're going to smell, and if it's very citrusy aroma in the air, we might be more interested in buying oranges. So all of that is happening in our split second decision making process. And so a lot of the easy critique that we can kind of take at just economics, especially in the early stages, what we're talking about in these lessons really is the economics that is um, simplified beyond true like precision in the real world. So when we talk about the free market and we draw a diagram with a supply curve and a demand curve that slope upward and downward, and where they intersect sets the market price, that's a very kind of rare, if it exists in many instances at all, situation in the real world. But it is valuable, and it can help us understand um, kind of the way that we use resources, the way we allocate our resources, and potentially kind of inform better decisions based on that understanding. So that brings me back to marginal thinking and how we don't necessarily think, I'm going to study one more hour and I hope to answer 5 more questions correctly when I take the exam tomorrow. But I guess the way I always approach economics as from a marginal thinking perspective is that maybe we should. So if we take this approach that we need to look at the clock and say, I'm going to study for 1 more hour, and if I can reasonably expect to get 6 more questions correct tomorrow, then that hour of study will be worthwhile to me. And so I choose to do the studying, as opposed to looking at it and saying, I think I'm probably going to get a 90% tomorrow. And if I study for 1 more hour, I'll bet I'll probably get no better than a 92 or 93%. So instead, I'm going to watch Netflix for an hour. And that really is an example of marginal thinking that you might do again at that split second level. But if you do slow it down, you can really, I think, be a lot more deliberate about what we want to accomplish in maybe for that studying goal, for that evening's kind of relaxation and entertainment, for just other life decisions. Kind of when you weigh the real opportunity cost and kind of think about the marginal cost of your decision versus the marginal benefit you're going to gain, I think that it really just represents being a little bit more deliberate in kind of decision making. And um, I think it's one of the things that economics can offer um, as a thought process that maybe isn't always taken full advantage of. So let's kind of look at marginal thinking and this concept of studying for another hour, and how we would actually, you know, create a marginal benefit and marginal cost curve, which ultimately represents the marginal benefit curve is representing the demand curve for our demand for more studying. And the marginal cost is essentially the additional cost in terms of what we're going to give up in terms of other things that we might do instead of studying. And when we compare that to the value of that additional studying, we would maybe see that, uh, let's see, probably, I don't know where we're intersecting here. I don't think we've set these up to where we've got a perfect intersect. If we did, um, I think it might be because it's 2.5 hours here. The benefit. So at 2.5 hours studied, the benefit is greater than the marginal cost of 2.5 hours studied. But when we move on to 3.5 hours studied, we decrease our marginal benefit and increase our marginal cost. So it looks like at 3 hours studied is our optimal amount of time that we study, because we end up with a marginal benefit equal to the marginal cost of studying at exactly 3 hours for both. And that comes back to what we talked about a little bit yesterday with our walkthrough of the question, and something that I'm just going to repeat and remake a note of it every single opportunity I get, because you really, really want to memorize it. But MR equals MC is, and actually I'm going to put it in this format, MB equals MC. So we maximize benefits where marginal benefit is equal to marginal cost. In other words, the last bit of effort we put in got us back the exact kind of value equal to the effort. But for example, at 2.5 hours of studying, we were still getting more benefit from that time than we were putting in terms of things where other stuff in our life that we're giving up. So where the marginal benefit is equal to marginal cost, or where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, that's our maximization point. And it's always where the additional cost is equal to the additional effort or the additional reward, kind of benefit utility that we're gaining. And then this is just kind of another way of looking at it. And here we've kind of put the marginal benefit and marginal cost curves together. And so this would be like that point we identified on the prior diagram at 3 hours of study. And so our net benefit is maximized because that last minute of study essentially got us the last sliver of possible total benefit. And if, for example, we were to continue studying, we would end up we would be giving up more in other aspects of our life, or maybe we'd be giving up more potential points on another class's exam by studying too much for economics. So we end up with a dead weight loss because that extra studying time isn't as valuable as the first hour that we study, and we're really getting super familiar with the vocabulary. But once we take away that low-hanging fruit, that easy access learning, we end up getting to the more marginally difficult or marginally costly kind of improvements that may be in excess of the benefits that we would get when we actually put in that effort. And then the same thing is true if we were to undershoot this scenario and study at point E. We're not gaining all of the total benefits that we could, because by studying fewer hours, we aren't taking advantage of like that from 2.5 to 3.5 hours on the previous diagram, where we had, or I guess 2.5 to 3 hours, where we still had a surplus of benefits for studying an additional amount of time compared to the costs that we were going to put in. So kind of to go back and like re-simplify this, your textbook and the way that we look at economic thinking and marginal thinking in economics classes is really that the next step The next thing is where we should kind of be focused when we're making a decision. And this plays into a key term that you're going to see called sunk cost. And the sunk cost is basically what's already been given up and can't be recovered. So if we think about sunk cost as costs that have already been given up and can't be recovered, the scenario that I want you to kind of try to wrap your head around a little bit. It doesn't make sense as an individual, but it will maybe help make this concept make a little more sense economically and hopefully unlock a little bit of sunk cost vocabulary. But imagine you are in college and you are one semester away from graduation. And during that semester, you only have to take maybe 3 classes. So, a relatively light schedule, but it's going to prevent you from working full time alongside going to school that last semester. So, you're looking around and someone you kind of are lucky and you network and you meet someone and they offer you a position making 5 times what you expect to earn when you finally finish and get your degree. So, like, say you expect to get a degree and your expected pay is, for simplicity's sake, $50,000 a year. And this person, just before your last semester of college, when you're a senior and you're that close to getting your bachelor's degree, someone offers you a job paying $250,000 a year. Let's assume that isn't going to be one of those things that let's assume it's going to be a stable career. Like you're going to be an executive assistant for um, some person who is you trust to provide you a reliable job. You don't expect it to be a promise that isn't kept. So by taking this $250,000 a year position, you would assume that you're going to start there and you're going to be able to potentially work your way up even higher from that income level. Now, the way that we're kind of really conditioned to think as people and the way that it works out when we're actually making decisions in life is this would be very, very difficult decision. If the job offers that you have to start now, so you can't reasonably finish college and take this position. If you finish college, you're going to enter a field where you can expect to be making $50,000 a year. If you decide to drop out of college this close to the end, you can be making $250,000 a year. An economist, someone thinking marginally, understanding sunk costs, is going to take that position without much hesitation. Because regardless of what you've put in, all of the effort, all of the 3.5 years of school that you put in, your opportunity cost, what you're going to give up by going to school for one more semester, is $200,000 a year. Because you're going to give up the $250,000 a year position to secure a $50,000 a year position. So the sunk cost is what you've already given up in terms of the years of schooling you've put in. And in terms of marginal thinking, we need to ignore all of that and just look at, is the marginal benefit of this decision greater than the marginal cost of this decision? And in terms of facing that career option, the marginal benefit of one more year of college is $50,000. One more semester of college is $50,000. The marginal cost is $250,000. So you would be better off dropping out of college, even that close to the end. I mean, this would be true if they offered you the position right before your finals and just said, hey, you got to get on a plane. You can't go take your finals, so you will fail this semester. But that's how we need to understand marginal thinking, is that we're going to ignore marginal or the sunk costs completely, and we're going to focus on is the marginal benefit, the marginal utility, the marginal revenue worth the marginal cost, the additional cost of doing that activity, of selling that good, of buying that item. And that's really the heart of what we're looking at. And we need to focus on marginal changes in order to understand economics, even if sometimes that disconnects from what we really do when we go to the store and we make decisions. Because I'm guilty of it as well. You know, when we make a decision based on a whim, we're not really always thinking as rationally. A lot of addictive behaviors that human beings have aren't in line with this rational thinking entirely. There are other kind of deeper economic explanations for some of these things. But if you try to take the simplified kind of basic economics intro to micro or macroeconomics and principles of micro and macroeconomics level stuff and apply it to the real world you see and all of its complexities, that's where we end up having a little more trouble. And that's really where the subject becomes more frustration than kind of unlocking a new way to think and understand things that I think even if you're not going to become an economist, it should be helpful to you and help kind of make the world a easier to understand place. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for the emails and the comments. Today was just kind of a more conceptual lesson. I think every so often, possibly even every other day, I'm going to walk through either a batch of multiple choice questions or a free response sample and just kind of talk about how we will use the vocabulary to kind of step through and navigate the question, being careful to catch any specific vocabulary that tells us things we need to consider. So I'm going to try to alternate between kind of focusing on sample questions and vocabulary discussion. And then at the point where we get maybe more people joining in and asking questions in the chat, then we can kind of let that drive it and potentially run a little bit longer. But I think that'll do it for today. Thank you. And this has been Nanoeconomics, Marginal Thinking. I'll see you next time.